This is the story of the happiest day of my life, or at least, it was supposed to be. A day filled with love, joy, and promises of forever. My wedding day. A moment I had dreamed about since the day I proposed to Rachel, the woman I thought would be my partner for life. I woke up that morning filled with excitement. The kind that makes your heart race, not from fear, but from the anticipation of starting a new chapter. My best friend Mike was right there beside me, cracking jokes, making sure everything was perfect. We'd been through so much together, more than 2 decades of friendship. He was more than just a friend, he was family. Rachel was radiant, glowing with happiness, or at least, that's what I thought. Seeing her in that dress for the first time took my breath away. She was everything I'd ever wanted. Everything I thought I'd ever need. But as I moved through the day, hugging relatives, chatting with friends, I couldn't shake this feeling. Not nerves, not doubt, but something else. A kind of tension I didn't fully understand at the time. Looking back, the little moments that didn't make sense then feel so clear now. But in that moment, I brushed them aside. It was my wedding day. I didn't want to believe that anything could be wrong. Little did I know, while I was celebrating with the people I trusted the most, my entire life was about to change. And it wasn't just the wedding that would come to an end that night, it was everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and friendship. This is my story. It's a story I need to share with you. Subscribe to Wild Love Story and turn on notifications. Because what you're about to hear, you won't believe. A year ago, I stood at the altar, looking into the eyes of the woman I thought I would spend the rest of my life with. Rachel was my everything. The woman who made me believe in love, in partnership, in a future that was bigger than myself. And Mike, my best friend since I was 12 years old, stood beside me as my best man, smiling as if he were just as excited for my new beginning. Mike and I had been inseparable for as long as I could remember. We went through everything together: school, heartbreaks, family struggles. He was the one person I could always rely on, and I never doubted for a second that he felt the same way about me. He wasn't just a friend, he was my brother. The kind of bond you don't question. And Rachel, she came into my life like a breath of fresh air. We met in college. She was funny, smart, driven, everything I had ever wanted in a partner. I remember thinking, the first time I saw her, this is it. This is the person I'm going to grow old with. And for years, it felt like we were building the perfect life together. By the time we decided to get married, it felt like the natural next step. We had built a life together, shared dreams, a cozy apartment, and a future we couldn't wait to start. The proposal wasn't flashy or extravagant, but it was perfect for us. Just the two of us on a quiet evening, with Rachel laughing as she said, "Yes, of course, yes." But looking back, there were moments, little things, that I ignored. Times when Rachel seemed distracted, or Mike was different around her. I thought it was just in my head. I mean, why would I even think to question either of them? They were the two people I trusted more than anyone else in the world. Our wedding day was everything we had planned for months. Rachel had been meticulous about every detail: the flowers, the seating arrangements, the playlist. She wanted it to be perfect, and I wanted it to be perfect for her. Everyone we loved was there, cheering us on, and I couldn't stop smiling. I was marrying the love of my life, surrounded by the people who mattered most. Mike was the life of the party, as usual. He kept the mood light, kept me calm when the nerves started to kick in. He handed me a drink, clapped me on the back, and said, "You're a lucky man, Adam. Rachel's 1 in a million." I laughed and told him, "I know." Because I really did believe that. Everything felt so normal, so right. Even when Rachel seemed a little off during the rehearsal dinner the night before, I chalked it up to pre-wedding stress. I mean, who wouldn't be stressed, right? The weeks leading up to the wedding had been a whirlwind of planning, family drama, and last-minute details. I told myself it was nothing. It had to be nothing. There was this moment, though, right before the ceremony started. I was standing at the front of the aisle, waiting for Rachel to walk down. The music had started, everyone was standing, and I glanced over at Mike. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the back of the room where Rachel was about to enter. For a split second, I saw something in his expression, but I couldn't place it. Was it nervousness? Sadness? I didn't know. And before I could think more about it, the doors opened, and there she was. Rachel looked stunning. Absolutely breathtaking. She smiled at me as she walked down the aisle, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the nerves, not the planning, not even the look on Mike's face. It was just her. My future. Everything I had ever wanted. I didn't know then, as I stood there saying my vows, that this day wasn't the beginning of something new. It was the beginning of something I never could have imagined. Something I wouldn't have believed if you told me. Sometimes, the people closest to you can hide the most from you. And as much as you think you know someone, you never truly do, not until they show you who they really are. The wedding wasn't just a celebration of love. For me, it became the moment my world started to fall apart. But at the time, I didn't see it. I didn't know that the people I trusted most were about to betray me in ways I couldn't imagine. As far as I was concerned, everything that day was perfect. But sometimes, perfection is just a mask, a thin layer hiding cracks that are waiting to split wide open. After the ceremony, we headed straight into the reception. I was on cloud nine, surrounded by family and friends, laughing and celebrating. Rachel seemed radiant, smiling at everyone, thanking our guests. And Mike, as always, was the perfect best man. He gave a toast that had everyone in stitches, reminiscing about our childhood and how we'd been like brothers for so long. But there was this moment during the toast, when he mentioned Rachel. It wasn't anything obvious. Just a glance, a fleeting moment where his eyes met hers for a second too long. I brushed it off, thinking, of course he'd look at her, she's the bride. He's just being thoughtful. And yet, something about it stuck in my mind. The rest of the evening was everything you'd expect from a wedding. People were dancing, taking pictures, and sharing stories about Rachel and me. Every time I looked at her, she was surrounded by friends or family, laughing and glowing. But there were these small moments that felt off. At one point, I noticed Rachel and Mike talking off to the side. They weren't close, but something about their body language caught my attention. She was laughing, but not in the way she usually did with me. And Mike, he wasn't his usual loud, joking self. He looked serious, like they were having an intense conversation. I remember thinking, maybe he's just checking on her. It's been a long day for both of us. Still, the feeling lingered. I told myself I was imagining things. I mean, why wouldn't I trust them? They were two of the most important people in my life. If anything, I thought it was sweet that Mike was looking out for Rachel. That's the kind of guy he was, or at least, the kind of guy I thought he was. As the night went on, little things started to stand out. Rachel would disappear for a few minutes at a time, saying she needed to freshen up or step outside for some air. I didn't think much of it, after all, it was a big day, and I knew she must have been exhausted. But now, I wonder, was she really just stepping out to clear her head? And then there was Mike. He'd always been social, but he seemed distracted that night. He wasn't mingling as much as he usually did. I caught him staring at Rachel a few times, not for long, just a glance here and there. But it was enough to make me wonder. Enough to plant a seed of doubt that I tried desperately to ignore. At one point, I walked over to Rachel to ask her for a dance. She was standing with a small group of friends, laughing and sipping champagne. When I reached her, she gave me a quick smile and said, "Not now, Adam, maybe later." It wasn't a big deal, but it stung a little. It wasn't like her to turn me down, especially on a day like this. I told myself she was just overwhelmed, that she'd come around. And she did, eventually. But that small rejection stayed with me. Meanwhile, Mike had vanished. I figured he was probably off chatting with some of the guests or grabbing another drink. It wasn't unusual for him to wander off at events like this. But the timing felt strange. It was around the same time Rachel had stepped out for some air. I didn't connect the dots then, but now it's impossible not to. Toward the end of the night, the nagging feeling in the back of my mind started to grow. I couldn't pinpoint why, but something just didn't feel right. I tried to shake it off. I reminded myself that this was my wedding day, the happiest day of my life. I shouldn't be questioning anything, especially not the two people I trusted most. And yet, there were these little moments that didn't add up. The way Rachel would glance at Mike when she thought I wasn't looking. The way Mike seemed quieter than usual whenever we were all together. And then there was that strange text I saw on Rachel's phone a week before the wedding. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, it was gnawing at me. The text was from Mike. It said, "We need to talk. I can't do this anymore." I had asked Rachel about it, and she laughed it off, saying it was about a surprise he was planning for the wedding. She even showed me a follow-up text where Mike said, "Never mind, forget I said anything." I believed her because, well, why wouldn't I? She was my fiancée. And Mike was my best friend. But standing there at the reception, watching the two of them from across the room, I couldn't help but wonder, was there more to that message than she let on? Was I missing something that was right in front of me the whole time? I didn't know it then, but everything I was feeling, the doubt, the unease, it wasn't in my head. It wasn't paranoia. It was the truth, trying to break through. And soon, I would have no choice but to face it. Everything I had been trying to ignore, all the doubts I had pushed aside, were about to come crashing down in a way I could never have prepared for. The reception was winding down. Most of the guests had left or were heading out, and it was just close family and a handful of friends still lingering. Rachel had been smiling all night, but something about her energy felt different. She wasn't tired, exactly. If anything, she seemed restless, almost distracted. I noticed she kept checking her phone, glancing at it every few minutes. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, it had been a long day, and maybe she was just coordinating something with the hotel staff or our families. But then she got up and walked out of the room without saying anything to me. Just a quick glance in my direction and then she was gone. I decided to let it go. I stayed back, chatting with a couple of friends and thanking them for being there. But as the minutes ticked by, I started to wonder where she'd gone. I stepped out into the hallway, expecting to find her near the bathrooms or maybe out on the patio, but she wasn't there. And that's when I saw Mike. He was coming out of a side door, adjusting his jacket. He looked up and froze when he saw me. It was just a second, barely noticeable, but it was enough to make me stop in my tracks. He smiled quickly and said, "Hey man, just needed some air. This party's been a blast, huh?" There was something off about his tone. He wasn't his usual easygoing self. I nodded and asked if he'd seen Rachel. He hesitated for the briefest moment before saying, "Yeah, she's probably with her mom or something. You know how it is." Then he clapped me on the shoulder and walked back toward the main room. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something about the way he avoided eye contact, the way he seemed almost too casual, stuck with me. I stood there for a moment, trying to decide if I was overthinking it. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the door he'd just come through. It wasn't one of the main doors to the venue, it led to a small storage area we had used earlier in the day. I don't know what made me do it, but I walked over and pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit, cluttered with extra chairs and boxes of decorations we hadn't used. At first, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. But then, I heard it, a whisper. Quiet, hurried voices coming from the far side of the room. My heart started pounding. I don't even know why. Maybe deep down, I already knew. I stepped closer, trying to make out the voices. One of them was Rachel's. The other was Mike's. I froze. For a moment, I just stood there, listening. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but the tone was unmistakable. It wasn't casual. It wasn't friendly. It was intimate. And then, as I stepped closer, I saw them. They were standing close, too close. Mike's hand was on her arm, and Rachel was looking up at him, her face filled with something I can't even describe. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't regret. It was almost relief, like she had been holding something in for so long and finally let it out. I cleared my throat. The sound startled them, and they both turned to look at me. Rachel's eyes widened, and she took a step back, but she didn't say anything. Mike opened his mouth like he was about to speak, but no words came out. For a moment, none of us said anything. The silence was deafening. I just stood there, staring at the two people I trusted most in the world, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Finally, I asked, "What's going on?" My voice was calm, but inside, I was breaking apart. Rachel looked down, avoiding my gaze. Mike shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair. And then, finally, Rachel spoke. "Adam. I'm so sorry." That was all she said. Just those 3 words. But they were enough to make my whole world come crashing down. I looked at Mike, waiting for him to say something, anything, but he just stood there, staring at the floor like a kid caught doing something wrong. I asked again, louder this time, "What's going on?" That's when Rachel finally looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "It's not what you think," she said. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't mean for this to happen. What did she mean by that? I demanded answers, but all she did was cry. And Mike, my so-called best friend, he just stood there, silent, like a coward. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mike spoke. "Adam, I'm sorry, man. I never wanted this to happen." His voice was shaky, and he couldn't even look me in the eye. I asked him, "How long?" And that's when the truth came out. Rachel admitted they had been seeing each other behind my back for months. She said it started as a mistake, a drunken night they both regretted, but then it became something more. Something they couldn't stop, no matter how much they tried. She said they thought they could get through the wedding, that it would all go away once we were married. But they couldn't. And now, standing there in that storage room, they had no choice but to tell me the truth. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My best friend. My fiancé. The 2 people I trusted most in the world. I asked them, did anyone else know? Did anyone else see this coming? Rachel shook her head, but Mike hesitated. "Your sister suspected something," he admitted. "She tried to warn me," I thought to myself. But I didn't listen. I walked out of that room without saying another word. I couldn't even look at them. The people I thought I knew. I didn't know them at all. That's the part that hurt the most, not just the betrayal, but the realization that the people I thought I knew, the people I trusted with my entire life, were strangers to me. Standing there in the hallway, my mind was racing, replaying every moment, every memory, every red flag I had ignored. I walked out of the venue, barely noticing the people around me. Friends and family called out, asking if I was okay, but I couldn't answer. How could I? Everything felt surreal, like I was watching my life fall apart from the outside. I ended up in the parking lot, sitting in my car with the engine off, staring at nothing. After what felt like hours, Rachel came outside. She didn't see me at first, but when she did, she froze. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she slowly walked over and knocked on the car window. I rolled it down, not because I wanted to hear what she had to say, but because I needed answers. She stood there, tears streaming down her face, and said, "Adam, I'm so sorry. I know I can't fix this, but I need you to know, it wasn't supposed to happen like this." Her voice cracked as she spoke, and for a brief moment, I saw the person I thought I knew. But it didn't make her words any easier to hear. I asked her why. Why would she do this to me, to us? She hesitated, then said, "I don't know. It just happened. Mike and I," she stopped herself, like she couldn't bring herself to say it. But I needed to hear it. I needed to understand. Mike and I, we didn't plan for this. It started after that night at the engagement party. My stomach dropped. The engagement party. That was the night we had celebrated with all our friends, the night I had gone home early because I wasn't feeling well. I had trusted Mike to make sure Rachel got home safely. She told me that they had been drinking, that they had talked about things they'd never talked about before. "We connected," she said. "Not in a way that makes what we did okay, but in a way that. I don't know how to explain it." Her words felt like daggers. Every sentence cut deeper, but I couldn't stop listening. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. "We told ourselves it was a mistake, that it would never happen again," she continued. But it didn't stop. I didn't know how to stop it. And when the wedding got closer, I thought, maybe if I went through with it, it would fix everything. That we could move on. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for forgiveness. But I didn't have any to give. I asked her about Mike. What had he said? What did he feel about all of this? She hesitated again, then said, "He wanted to tell you. He said we couldn't go through with the wedding without coming clean. But I begged him not to. I thought it would ruin everything." She laughed bitterly, wiping her tears. "And I guess it did anyway." Her words hit me like a truck. Mike had wanted to tell me. He had known all along that what they were doing was wrong, but instead of telling me the truth, he let it continue. And Rachel, she chose to protect herself, to protect her secret, rather than protecting me. I sat there in silence, staring at her as she cried. Part of me wanted to scream, to yell, to ask her how she could betray me like this. But another part of me was too numb to feel anything. All I could say was, "Why didn't you just tell me? Why did you let me believe we had a future?" She shook her head, unable to answer. "I thought I could fix it," she said again. "I thought I could make it right. But there was no making it right. Not after what she and Mike had done." As she walked away, I realized something. I wasn't just mourning the loss of Rachel or the end of our relationship. I was mourning the life I thought I was going to have. The future we had planned together. The trust one had given so freely to her and Mike. It was all gone. I went back inside the venue, not because I wanted to see anyone, but because I needed to find Mike. I needed to hear his side of the story. When I found him, he was standing alone near the bar, staring into his drink. He looked up when he saw me, and for a moment, he seemed almost relieved. But that relief quickly turned to guilt when he saw the look on my face. "We need to talk," I said. He nodded, setting down his glass, and followed me to a quieter corner. I didn't waste any time. I asked him the same question I had asked Rachel, why? Why would he do this to me? He took a deep breath and said, "I don't have a good answer, Adam. I wish I did. I wish I could tell you it was a mistake, but it wasn't." He admitted that he had feelings for Rachel. That he had been jealous of me for years, watching me build a life with her while he felt like he was stuck in the background. "It wasn't about hurting you," he said. "It was about, finally feeling like I mattered to someone." His words were selfish, but at least they were honest. I stood there, listening to my best friend admit that he had put his own feelings above our friendship, above my happiness, above everything we had built together. And all I could think was, this isn't the Mike I thought I knew. He looked at me, his eyes filled with regret, and said, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll understand. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. As I walked away from him, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The people I had trusted most in the world had betrayed me, but in their betrayal, they had shown me exactly who they were. And for the first time that night, I realized, maybe it was better to know the truth than to live in a lie. But knowing the truth didn't make it any less painful. It didn't make it easier to accept what had just happened to my life, my relationships, and everything I thought I could count on. I left the venue without saying goodbye to anyone. The congratulations, the laughter, the well wishes, it all felt like a cruel joke now. The car ride home was silent, the roads blurred by tears I wasn't even aware I was crying. My mind was racing, replaying every moment of the night, every moment of the past few months, searching for answers I knew I'd never find. When I got home, I sat in the dark for hours. I didn't turn on the lights, didn't answer my phone, didn't respond to the texts and calls flooding in. Everyone wanted to know where I was, why I had left. But I couldn't bring myself to explain. How do you even begin to tell people that your wedding day, the day that's supposed to be the happiest of your life, ended like this? The first person to show up at my door was my sister. She didn't say much, just hugged me and sat with me in silence. I think she knew I wasn't ready to talk. She had always been protective of me, and in that moment, I could feel her anger simmering just below the surface. But she didn't push. She just stayed, and for that, I was grateful. The next morning, the messages from Rachel started coming in. Long texts filled with apologies, explanations, and pleas for me to talk to her. She said she wanted to fix things, that she made a mistake, that she never meant to hurt me. But every word felt hollow. How could someone who had spent months lying to me expect me to believe anything they said now? Mike reached out too. His messages were shorter but no less painful. He didn't try to defend himself. He just kept saying how sorry he was, how he never wanted this to happen, how he hoped I could forgive him one day. But forgiveness felt impossible. Trust felt impossible. For days, I avoided everyone. I didn't go to work, didn't talk to friends, didn't leave my apartment. The weight of everything felt unbearable. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't stop replaying the moment I saw them together in that storage room. Every time I closed my eyes, it was there. The whispers. The looks. The betrayal. It wasn't until my sister forced me to get out of the house that I started to see the cracks in the facade I had built around my life. She told me, Adam, you can't let them take everything from you. They've already taken enough. Her words stuck with me. She was right. As much as it hurt, I couldn't let Rachel and Mike define the rest of my life. I started going to therapy. At first, it felt strange, sitting in a room with a stranger and pouring out all the pain I had buried inside. But over time, it became a lifeline. My therapist helped me see that the betrayal wasn't about me, it was about them, their choices, their flaws. It didn't make the pain go away, but it helped me start to let go of the guilt and self-blame I had been carrying. My family and friends became my support system. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, offering kind words and encouragement. It was humbling to realize how much love and support I had around me, even as I felt so alone in my pain. As the weeks turned into months, the anger started to fade. It didn't disappear completely, it still lingered, especially when I thought about what Mike and Rachel had done, but it no longer consumed me. I realized that holding on to that anger was only hurting me, not them. And I didn't want to carry it anymore. I started focusing on myself, on rebuilding my life, piece by piece. I picked up hobbies I had neglected, spent time with people who brought me joy, and slowly, I began to feel like myself again. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the pain felt fresh all over again, but I kept moving forward. Rachel tried to reach out a few more times. She sent letters, left voicemails, even showed up at my apartment once. But I didn't let her in. I knew there was nothing she could say that would change what had happened. And I knew that letting her back into my life would only reopen wounds that were finally starting to heal. Mike, he didn't try as hard. Maybe he knew there was no coming back from what he had done. The last message I got from him was a simple, "I hope you're okay." I never responded. I didn't need to. Some things don't deserve closure. There were moments when I wondered if I had made the right choice, if cutting them both out of my life completely was the best way to move forward. But then I remembered the pain, the lies, the betrayal. And I knew I had made the only choice I could. It's strange how something so devastating can also teach you so much about yourself. I learned that I'm stronger than I ever thought I could be. That I can survive even the worst heartbreak and come out the other side. And most importantly, I learned that my worth isn't defined by how others treat me, it's defined by how I choose to move forward. The fallout from that day changed everything. It shattered my trust, my relationships, my plans for the future. But it also gave me something I never expected, a chance to start over. To rebuild a life that was mine, and mine alone. That became my goal. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of everything felt unbearable, but slowly, I began to see a path forward. I started to reflect on the person I had been before all of this, the person who trusted so easily, who believed so completely in the people I loved. And while that trust had been shattered, I realized something important: it wasn't a flaw to believe in people. It wasn't a weakness to love without hesitation. It was a strength. Over time, I began to forgive myself. Not for the betrayal, I knew that wasn't my fault, but for the way I had doubted myself in the aftermath. For questioning my own worth because of someone else's choices. I realized that their actions said more about who they were than they ever could about me. I thought a lot about Rachel and Mike during those months. Not because I wanted them back in my life, but because I needed to understand why it had all happened. And the truth is, sometimes there's no satisfying answer. People make selfish choices. People hurt each other. And sometimes, it's not about closure, it's about moving forward without it. I also started to think about what I wanted my life to look like now. Without Rachel. Without Mike. Without the plans we had made together. At first, it was daunting, the idea of starting over, of rebuilding from scratch. But then I realized something: this was an opportunity. A chance to create a life that was mine, built on my own terms, with people I could truly trust. I surrounded myself with people who lifted me up, who reminded me of the good in the world. Friends, family, even new connections I made along the way, they became my anchors. They reminded me that even in the face of heartbreak, there is still love, still kindness, still hope. As the months passed, I began to feel lighter. The memories of that day, the storage room, the whispered voices, the looks on their faces, started to fade. They didn't disappear completely, but they lost their power over me. They became just that, memories. Pieces of my past, not the definition of my future. I also began to appreciate the lessons I had learned through all of this. Betrayal had taught me the value of boundaries, of protecting my heart without closing it off completely. It had shown me the importance of paying attention to the little things, of trusting my instincts when something doesn't feel right. And most importantly, it had taught me that I am capable of surviving even the deepest pain. Rachel and Mike are no longer part of my life. I don't know where they are or what they're doing now, and honestly, I don't care. I've let go of the anger, the resentment, the questions that will never have answers. They are part of my story, but they are not the whole story. They are chapters one have closed, pages I no longer need to reread. In the end, this experience didn't break me. It shaped me. It taught me that even when everything falls apart, we have the strength to pick up the pieces and rebuild. It taught me that pain is temporary, but growth is forever. And it taught me that sometimes, the hardest moments in life are the ones that make us the strongest. So if you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever felt like your world has crumbled around you, know this: it's not the end. It's a beginning. A chance to rebuild, to redefine, to rediscover who you are. You are stronger than you think. You are capable of more than you know. And no matter how dark it feels right now, the light will return. This was my story, a story of love, betrayal, heartbreak, and healing. A story that changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. And if sharing it can help even one person feel less alone, then maybe it was worth going through after all. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you've made it this far, I want you to know how much it means to me. And if you've ever experienced something similar, I hope my story reminds you that you're not alone, and that healing is possible. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild Love Story for more real, raw, and unforgettable stories of love and resilience. And if this story resonated with you, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember, every ending is a new beginning.